Hi pre-algebra students, this video is going to be introducing part 2 of our lesson on graphing proportional relationships. Let's start with a review of what we learned in part 1. In part 1 we learned that when you graph equations like this, y equals 1/2 x, this number right here in front of x we call our slope. And your slope tells you about the direction of the line. If you use our formula rise over run with your slope, if our slope is 1/2, that means this line is going to rise 1 or go up 1 and run 2 or go over 2. So it means on a graph we would be starting at that point 0, 0, and then our line rises 1 box and runs 2 boxes, and the next point on the line would be there. And we could continue this, rise 1, run 2, rise 1, run 2, to get more points on the line. And then we could always connect them with a line. And see, that right there is the graph of the line. In class, we said this is going to be the easiest, fastest way to graph a line. You could always, if you prefer, make a table. Remember, when you make a table, you can choose any values you want for x. So for example, if I make x 0 in the equation y equals 1/2 x, that would mean y equals 1/2 times 0, which is 0. And that point 0, 0 matches up with our very first point right here. We could continue to do this with different numbers to find more points on the line. For example, if x is the number 2, y equals 1/2 times 2. So y would equal 1/2 times 2 is 1, and so we get the point 2, 1. 2, 1 is where the second point is. And you could keep doing this if you want for different values of x. Y equals 1/2 times 4, so y equals 2. And every single time you do that, you find another point on our line. This also works. This, in my opinion, is going to take longer, but there are two ways to create this graph, and creating a table is a different way. In our first part of this lesson, we talked about equations like this, where your slope is a fraction, like 1/2, and also equations where it's a whole number, like y equals 2x or y equals 3x. And we said in part 2, we were going to be looking at equations like these, where your slope is a negative number. Now, we haven't graphed one like this, so I actually am going to go ahead and start by making a table to give us an idea what this graph will look like. So if I make our table, again, I like to start with x equals 0, and for this equation, the same as the one above, even though our slope is negative, if you make x 0, negative 1/2 times 0, it's still giving me that 0 there. So I know when I go to graph this equation, we're also going to start right there at the center at that point 0, 0. The difference is going to be what happens when you pick other numbers for x. For example, if I make x the number 2, we get y equals negative 1/2 times 2. Earlier I said 1/2 times 2 is 1, but if you multiply a negative and a positive, it gives us negative 1. So that means another point on our line would be at 2, negative 1. 2 on x, negative 1 on y. So right there. We could keep doing this. For example, if x is 4, we get y equals negative 1/2 times 4, and y equals negative 2. That would be this next point right here at 4, negative 2. And one of the things you might notice if you compare this graph to the one above it is the one above is going up. We said it was going to go up 1 and over 2 every single time. But if I look at where the points here are landing, that line is going down. And so the biggest difference we are going to see when we graph slopes with negative numbers is those lines are always going to go down. From left to right on our graph, it's going to be going this direction. Now, we can make a table if we want to graph this, but it is not necessary. Instead of making this table, you could do the same thing we did above, where we're starting at 0, 0, and then we're using our slope in that formula rise over run. The only difference this time for rise over run is our slope is negative 1/2. And so when I see that negative right there, it means instead of going up 1, we would go down 1, and still the same as before, over 2. So looking at our graph, we could start at 0 and then go down 1 over 2 to get our next point. Down 1 over 2. So the biggest difference here with that negative slope is instead of going up 1 and over 2, you are going down 1 and over 2. Down 1 over 2 again and again. We're going to be practicing that more in today's lesson. I hope you found this video helpful and come back for the next one. Bye y'all.